leader, and he's about 5 inches shorter than me. I feel really tall next to him. It's great, actually. Well, it's lovely to be here today, and I was delighted to be invited to come. It's always a joy to be with you, and I'm disappointed that Amy was not able to be here. She was coming until Thursday. She's a care support worker for MenCap, and she has the most erratic schedule of any person on the planet, because she never knows what her hours are going to be until she gets her new timetable, and she only gets the timetable the week before the order runs out, and it lasts for 2 to 3 weeks. So it's hard to plan very many things, actually. So this week she's doing 3 of these sleep-ins, which is on a 24-hour shift. Poor girl, she's going to be exhausted. But the good news is we're going on holiday on Sunday, so that'll give her time to rest up, hopefully. But she did want me to send her love, nonetheless. By the way, Phil did a really good job of that reading, because it's always hard when you're reading the Bible, especially the Old Testament bits, because people got funny names, don't they? I remember I had a student once who was working with us in our first church in Redditch that we were working in, and he was supposed to be reading all of the list of all the names in Matthew's Gospel, you know, who begat, who begat, who begat, who sort of thing. And he got halfway through the list, and he said, "Flippin' heck, if I'm going to read all these stupid names out." Oh, you can tell he's a student in training, can't you, really? But it did remind me of the minister who said to his congregation, "Next week I'm going to preach a sermon about how to stop lying. So to do that, I want you all to read Mark chapter 17. So the next week, he asked his congregation, "How many of you read Mark chapter 17? And everybody's hand went up. And he said, "Mark only has 16 chapters. I'm going to go on with my sermon about lying." Well, the reality of our lives today is that everybody seems to be under all kinds of duress and pressure. Is that true for any of you? No matter where you turn, not only are there cutbacks, but there's problems here, there and everywhere, personally, family-wise, if you're working work-wise, and of course nationally, and even though we can cheer ourselves up a bit because, we've done well in the cricket, we didn't do so well in the football, and the Olympics are coming and all that, but it doesn't last, does it really? So what happens when problems come? Because inevitably, if you are alive long enough in life, there are going to be problems, aren't there? Always going to be problems. I did hear about this comedian who said he and his wife are having communication problems. He says, realise that men and women communicate differently. He says, for example, for time, his wife said to him, "I haven't seen you in 2 days." And he said, "Oh, I saw you 2 days ago." He says, there's a big difference between these 2 statements, apparently. And there is, isn't there, really? But it's not just those sort of problems. It's what do we do when real difficulty comes? How do we handle it? What do we do? And I think in this passage that we looked at today, that we've heard read to us today, there are some steps to help us learn how to deal with things when bad things happen, because they do. Just because we're Christians doesn't mean everything benefits, does it? Because that's life, isn't it? Now, a reminder of this story, King David, he was anointed as king as a child, but he still had to serve King Saul. And King Saul just didn't like him. He was at least jealous. He may even had an evil spirit, we're not sure. And he served King Saul by being in the court, and he would play his harp, and he would sing, and then all of a sudden King Saul would pick up his spear and chuck it at him. That would be an interesting way of dealing with Britain's Got Talent, wouldn't it? Because I'm sure there's a few people you've seen on there, you think, I could chuck a spear at a few of them as well, really. And I think Simon Cowell would if he got the chance, but that's another story. And then eventually, we know in the story that he has to leave and he's got a following of men, and they're on the run all the time from King Saul. King Saul's just out for him, really. And yet he has been anointed by the Lord. You know, this doesn't make sense. And we get to the place where David is so frustrated, he's actually joined the enemy. Just to save his life. And in joining the enemy, he's proven himself as a great warrior. But now the enemy is mixing with another kind of tribal group, and they say, well, David, we don't want you to go on this sort of battle, we want you to go back to the city we've given you for safety. And as he gets back to the city, the worst kind of experience you can imagine happens. It's all burned to the ground, and it's been looted and pillaged, and all of their families have been taken. Now that has got to be the most devastating experience that anyone can imagine. To lose everything. You've been doing everything you're supposed to do, you've been following exactly what God says, and it's all gone completely wrong. It's the story of Job as well, isn't it? It's a similar story. So, what does David do? This is what I want us to get to, because it might help you and I when we face difficulties in our lives. What do we do? Well, the first thing I see here is David expressed his feelings. He didn't pretend it was all right. You know, he didn't say, oh well, it's only just a few houses and a few wives and a few children, it doesn't really matter. He doesn't pretend, or he doesn't become like super spiritual that I've seen some Christians do. Oh, you know, God's got it all under control, it doesn't really matter. David is not afraid to say, this is terrible. And it actually says in the text here that when they got there, they wept aloud until they had no strength left. That is real, honest expression of your feelings, isn't it? Some of us might find that difficult at times. I'm not the best at that sort of thing myself, but there are times when you're so overwhelmed by things that it's the only recourse you've got to get it out in the open. So he doesn't deny his feelings, but equally, David doesn't not have consideration of others. Because I know we live in a world now where, I was just talking to Carol this morning, it's very easy for people to put things, their most intimate things up on Facebook or Twitter. I mean, why would you do that sort of thing? But people do that sort of thing, really. And therefore sometimes they're not considerate of others. Have you ever met people like that? Where you're talking to somebody and they're just completely inconsiderate and all they can think about is their feelings and their situation. Now I know when you're overwhelmed, you know, you've lost your job, you've had bad news, you've been in a difficult relationship or financially you're struggling, whatever, and you're facing that, that is traumatic. It's very, very difficult, isn't it? Let's not pretend it isn't. But David here, he's lost enormous amounts of things, hasn't he? He's lost his leadership, he's lost his wives, he's lost the trust of all of his men. He's trying to work out what on earth is going on here. But he doesn't just say, it's all about me. He's concerned about his other men as well. So he expresses his feelings, but he's considerate of others. And that's a very hard thing to do, actually. But David does that. And I think if we can learn to do that, that's a very healthy way of dealing with difficulty. The second thing I see him doing here that I think it can help us, and it's not like his men, because he's standing out here, he doesn't give in to despair. That's the most difficult thing, isn't it? When it's all going wrong, it's so easy, isn't it, to just think, I just don't care anymore. I've had enough. Now, anybody here ever feel that way? I even feel that way at times as well. You know, you're working with people, or I'm working with churches, or I'm working with students, or even if I look at my own life, I think, I just want to give up. You know, it's just not working anymore. It's too hard. That's what his men were feeling. They were just to the point of despair. They thought, why would we want to do anything else? We've given everything, and what do we get in return? We get this.